Hi, I'm Dr. Mac Adkins, founder and Chief Academic Officer for Smarter Services. I'm pleased to share with you the findings of the 2021 National Means Report of the SmarterMeasure Learning Readiness Indicator. This year's report is especially insightful in that, in addition to revealing the national scale and subscale score means, it also shares a 4-year trend analysis to identify changes in learner readiness during the period of the quarantine of the COVID-19 pandemic. To provide context for persons consuming this blog who may not be as familiar with the assessment as others, here is some overview information about the SmarterMeasure Learning Readiness Indicator. It is the most commonly used assessment to quantify levels of learner readiness based primarily on non-cognitive attributes and skills. Basically, it is measuring grit. Over the past 20 years, the assessment has been taken by over 6 million students from over 1,000 institutions. The assessment begins by looking at the learner internally. We call this section individual attributes. It measures constructs such as motivation, control over procrastination, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, time management, persistence, and academic attributes. While we are analyzing the learner internally, we also identify their dominant learning preferences, which is based on the multiple intelligences model. After we have looked at the student internally, we then look at the student externally. This section is called Life Factors. It measures variables such as one's availability of time, support from family and employers, having an appropriate, dedicated place to study, and one's health and finances. After looking at the learner internally and externally, we then measure several skill sets. We measure their on-screen reading rate and recall, technology competency, learning management system competency, general technical knowledge, and keyboarding rate and accuracy. Finally, the assessment also measures 2 cognitive skills of math and writing readiness. Each year, Smarter Services publishes the National Means Report, which provides the measures of central tendency for the scales and subscales measured by the assessment. One of the primary uses of this report is for institutions to compare the performance of their students to those of other students nationally. 2 caveats are for schools to recognize that the means provided in this report are from all students at all institution types nationwide. If schools are making decisions based on comparative data, we encourage them to request a custom report comparing means from their students to students from similar institutions. The other detail to recognize is that for ease of interpretation in this report, the scale scores for several factors have been converted from raw scores to percentile scores. Scores reported to individual students on their score reports are typically in the raw scale format. The means for each of the scales measured by the assessment for academic year 2021 are provided in a table on page 1 of the report. When presented in percentile format, the means for all but one scale are in the 70s, ranging from 70.71 for writing readiness to life factors at 77.28. Students tend to score higher on technical competency since it is measuring very basic computing information. Keyboarding skills are reported as adjusted words per minute, and the mean was 26.64. The number of prior online courses is measured on a scale of 0 to 5 or more, and the mean was 2.17. Starting on page 4 of the report are the subscale measures of central tendency, followed by bar charts to visually illustrate that most scale scores are normally distributed on what approximates a bell curve. The quarantine period of the COVID-19 pandemic occurred mostly during the academic year of 2019-2020. The table on page 1 of the report visually illustrates that the mean score on half of the scales measured by the assessment declined during this pandemic period. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many institutions closed their doors and moved much instruction online. This prompted many students for whom online learning was not their first choice to be constrained to learn by an online learning modality. This reduction in levels of learner readiness is demonstrated by the lowest mean on half of the scales we measured being experienced during that quarantine year. The following scales revealed the lowest means during that year: reading recall, technical knowledge, technical competency, and keyboarding. It is also telling to note that during the quarantine year, more students with no prior online learning experience studied online than ever before. One positive note is that after the quarantine year, there are now a higher number of students who have experienced learning online. During the quarantine year of the pandemic, more persons took the SmarterMeasure Learning Readiness Indicator than ever before. The diminished level of learner readiness reported by the assessment, coupled with the inferior quality of emergency remote instruction when compared to traditional online learning, is what prompted concern among many about the efficacy of academic continuity efforts during the pandemic. Mean scores on the life factors and individual attribute scales have consistently declined over the past 4 years by about 2 percentage points. This is a substantial observation, since these scales measure learner attributes, not skills. As such, these measurements are not delivery system dependent, meaning that they are equally important for students studying online, hybrid, or face-to-face. It is paramount that institutions measure this data for all students and provide appropriate strategies for intervention and support, since students are struggling more in these areas than they have in the past. Given these trends in learner readiness over the past 4 years, how should schools respond? Well, in response to declining learner attributes, schools need to provide strong services such as admissions coaching, academic advising, and mental health services to support learners as they grapple with challenges such as weakened motivation, pandemic-prompted procrastination, not knowing who to ask for help in a remote learning environment, feeling that they are not in control in the midst of a world that seems out of control, having an appropriate place to study when home environments may be crowded, recovering from life-threatening illnesses, and finally, the financial toll of the current reality. As a counter to declining technology skills, schools need to recognize that even though social media and video streaming may be dominant parts of learners' lives, information technology skills are often lacking. Students need to recognize that texting and typing are 2 different skill sets and should plan for ample time to compose larger papers and projects. The skills of reading for academic comprehension also differ substantively from the habits of quickly scrolling social media. Learners also need to be trained on digital literacy skills. Finally, to train students to strengthen their online learning strategies, schools need to provide elements of their orientation courses and new student onboarding programs that are reflective of the fact that many learners now have prior online learning experience. Elements of these programs need to not be only how to learn online, but how do we do online learning at this institution? If you'd like to learn more about the SmarterMeasure Learning Readiness Indicator and how it can be used to help your students as they emerge from the pandemic, please reach out today. Thank you.